We began our programming for this festival in the midst of Black Lives Matter protests happening across the country. And we wanted to explore the relevance of a social justice film festival like DisOrient in the larger context of our country's racial reckoning. Maybe unpack some history and survey the landscape through the lens and insights and experiences of our filmmakers. So we are incredibly grateful to have this illustrious panel today and to Jason for engaging in this important discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on Jason Mack.
Hi, Susan.
Jason is the founder of DisOrient, and we are happy to have him in recent festivals. He's mostly in the audience watching all the films, but we pulled him out in front of the camera this year to use his skill sets. So I will leave it to you, Jason.
Thanks so much, Susan.
Yeah. Thanks.
And, I just want to say a few words about Susan was great in getting this panel together. And this panel really came out of Susan and I kind of having a conversation around why is it that we didn't see very many films tackle the issue of Black Lives Matters or Asians for Black Lives in this year's festival. And so it was really a question that I think we struggled with, we were curious about, and we're hoping that maybe our panelists can help us shed some light on why that might be difficult and why that might be. So today we have on our panel, Karen Ishizuka, a third-generation Japanese American, a writer and chief curator of the Japanese American National Museum. She wrote and produced Toyo Miyatake, The Infinite Shades of Grey, an official selection of the Sundance Film Festival. She pioneered the establishment of the historical and cultural significance of home movies in the United States and served on the National Film Preservation Board. She received her master's degree in social work from San Diego State University and a PhD in anthropology from the University of California, Los Angeles. She is also currently president of the board of the Okura Mental Health Leadership Foundation. Tadashi Nakamura, or Tad, was named one of CNN's Young Black People Who Rock for being the youngest filmmaker at the 2008 Sundance Film Festival, and is listed as one of the top rising Asian American directors on IMDb. The fourth generation Japanese American directed the 2006 film Melee Murals, a documentary about the transformative power of modern graffiti art and the ancient Hawaiian culture of a new generation of Native Hawaiians. His earlier film, Jake Shimabukuro, Life on Four Strings, was broadcast nationally on PBS and went on to win the 2013 Gotham Independent Film Audience Award. Nakamura's documentary trilogy, Yellow Brotherhood, Pilgrimage, and A Song for Ourselves, garnered over 20 awards. His newest short, Atomic Cafe, is part of this year's DisOrient Japanese American Voices Past and Present Shorts program. Next up is Hasani Mustafa, who is a writer, director, actor, cinematographer, and creator. He has worked professionally in nearly every crew position there is in both television and film. His skills as a writer, director, and cinematographer have quickly earned him numerous awards and accolades. Hisonni has received nearly 100 awards for his two original television pilots, Fight Night Legacy and Olympia, including a 2013 Streamy Award nomination and a grand prize at Law EB Fest. I think that's how you say it. His most recent pilot, Grayson Earth One, has received great reviews from the likes of Marvel's Stan Lee, The Hollywood Reporter, Deadline Hollywood, The Collider, IGN, and countless others. You can catch his narrative film, Takeout Girl, in this year's DisOrient Asian American Film Festival. Welcome. Ursula Liang is a journalist turned filmmaker. She currently freelances as a film and television producer. One October, Third Act, Gloves Off, UFC Countdown, UFC Primetime, and a story consultant. She is a member of Film Fatales, ADOC, and sits on the board of Brown Girls Doc Mafia. Liang Liang grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, and lives in Bronx, New York. Her debut feature, Nine Man, was broadcast on public television and called an absorbing documentary by the New York Times. Her latest film, Down a Dark Stairwell, played at DisOrient Sneak Peek in February. And if you missed it, you can catch it later this year on PBS in April. Daisy, our final, but not least, final panelists. I am so losing my words here today. Sorry, Daisy. Daisy is a fifth-year student at Oregon State University, double majoring in digital communication arts and photography. She is a digital artist, photographer, and first-time filmmaker, born and raised in Southeast Portland. It's great to have local filmmakers. She currently works at OSU, Oregon State University, Asian and Pacific Cultural Center, APCC, and is co-president of the Asian Pacific American Student Union, APASU. I Am, But I Am Not is a docuseries that focuses on the dialogue surrounding racism against Asians during COVID-19, as well as anti-Blackness within the Asian community. You can catch her film as part of our Raising Our Voices Shorts program. I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday. It's very lovely to see you all. We're just going to jump right into it. The Asian American community and the African American communities have had a really long and complex historical relationship. We had solidarity moments like Yuri Kochiyama, Malcolm X, Grace Lee Boggs, MLK in the Vietnam War, ethnic studies protests, Asian radicals who worked with the Black Panthers. But then we've had moments of conflict like Latasha Harlins as one of the murder of Latasha Harlins as a catalyst for the LA uprisings, the shooting of Akai Gurley by an Asian police officer, and more recently among police officer Tu Tao, who stood by while his partner murdered George Floyd. So my question is, where do you think our community's relationship with each other stands today? And so I'm just going to go down my screen and let's start with Karen.
Thanks, Jason. Nice to be here. I think I just first want to acknowledge what had happened this last week. I think we can't ignore that. In reading and thinking about reading and seeing everything that's been written, about this, in terms of the topic today, I think it's just really critical that we frame the issue correctly. So, it's been, and I can understand it, but it's been a little disconcerting to see things like signs that say Yellow Lives Matter. I understand the emotion behind it, but in appropriating, Black Lives Matter, basically we're mitigating the significance, the importance, the depth of Black Lives Matter. And it's just like saying, well, all lives matter, white lives matter, and of course it's true, but, the issue is that, until Black people and Black lives matter, none of us will be free. And then, and in terms of say their names, I also heard that, which is also, that started when Breonna Taylor was killed. And once again, I understand that impact that wanting to do that, we need to know these women. I think I was really touched by reading this one Korean American woman who said that until she saw their names written in Korean, in Hangul, that it just really gripped her, at that time. But, I think that, we inadvertently fall into, appropriation sometimes. And I think that we need to be aware of that. And then I think, we fall into the more oppressed than thou sort of aspect too. And we forget that the reason that Black Lives Matter is because, and that why we have to say that, and why, I have Nikkei for Black Lives, is for white supremacy. And I think that we need to keep that in mind as we go forward. I think that it's very easy to fall into that at this time. Jason, you're muted.
It always happens, and somebody's always going to say that during a live Zoom, right? My apologies. Let's go to Daisy. What's the current state of our community relationship right now?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you for having me. I think that our relationships have always been tense. Just reflecting on my own family, I feel that family is very important. And so we always put our families first, which is why I feel like assimilation to this white society is something that Asian communities tend to do, which unfortunately means not showing up, to not bring attention to ourselves, which is why it is really sad to see like Asian elders being pushed down on the street, or like going to their jobs and having, and like not expecting to die and being shot at. So sorry. Going back to the question, I think that we need to be in solidarity with each other, but it is really difficult. And I think that when you brought up white supremacy, Karen, I think that that is kind of the root issue and something that we do need to acknowledge. And I think it's not something that is talked about a lot. It's important to remember people's names, and it's important to like remember like racism and all these issues, but I think the root of it all is white supremacy, and we don't acknowledge it. Yeah.
Thank you, Daisy. Tad, same question.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here with everyone. I guess to answer your question in terms of what was the question in terms of where's the state of the relationship between the two communities?
Yeah, what do you see?
I mean, I think it's a spectrum. I mean, I think our communities are diverse on both sides. So on one hand, I'm seeing a lot of beautiful solidarity work that has been going on for years. And moments like these, the last couple of months, is when all that work, we work for, all right, to have a foundation of solidarity, of relationships where we can come together. So I'm seeing really beautiful solidarity work. At the same time, I'm seeing very cringeworthy reactions by my own community, very embarrassing kind of things, very reactionary. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I see a spectrum of things. And that just shows, on one hand, how much work we've done and how much history we have, both as activists and as standing side by side in solidarity with the Black community. And it also shows how much work we have to do and how much historically there is tons of anti-Blackness in our community that we still need to address. And so on one hand, it shows how much work we've done, and it shows how much more work we need to do.
I keep doing it. Hisonni, what do you think?
I think Karen is amazing. I am like kind of nervous to be in this room with you. Tad, I'm a fan, brother. Daisy, that was beautiful. You almost made me cry, and I completely understand where you're coming from. I don't have a lot of like, obviously none of us really have like statistics and stats and percentages to back up where we're coming from. All we have is anecdotal evidence. But I think my greatest strength as a filmmaker is noticing commonalities, commonalities between everyone. And my strength as a filmmaker is telling stories that are crazy relatable, regardless of who the protagonist is. It's always rooted in something everybody can understand. And one thing we have in common right now is our hurt. I've been speaking to a lot of my Asian friends lately, one a couple days ago, and it kind of took me by surprise. And Daisy, you kind of tapped into it a little bit. My whole life as a Black man, I've been really praying that I would run into someone who understands what my life is like. And I kept using the word understand, understand, understand. And then I heard one of my best friends, who is Asian, crying about her mother not being able to leave the house. And the first thing I said is, this is not what I meant. This is not what I meant, God. Like, this is not what I meant. I don't wish this on anybody. But like everything she said is it's what I feel like every day. That fear is something I walk around with every day. And we do have to understand, like Karen said, it does come from a very centralized and well thought out place. And the bright side is, because of the George Floyd protest and what I'm sure are many more protests like that to come, we can be unified in a really beautiful way. But we have to understand that this is a system, even being pitted against one another. I mean, I can tell you 1,000 ways in which the Black community are being pitted against one another. And the roots of that go back to the 20s, the 30s, the 1800s even. And it's being done to your community too. I've been lucky enough to have a mother who always challenged me to look at how every community's, seeds of separation and divide and conquer have been implanted in that community since they got to America. And Lord knows, like, it's very difficult to not fall for those pitfalls. I think the biggest thing for all of us to recognize are the commonalities and the fact that people, it may not seem like it, but people are generally good. I've seen videos of Black people attacking Asians, and it infuriates me. And I know I come from a neighborhood full of super predators who, even the thugs that I grew up with in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the most segregated city in America, 53206, there's documentaries made about the zip code I'm from because it's the most incarcerated area for Black men in the country.
Wow.
I am the only boy from my block to not go to jail or get shot. And all of those boys would have seen someone attacking an elder of any race and done something about it. So as sad as things are and as terrible as things are, we just have to recognize that the greater majority of Asians, Blacks, Latinos, even whites, they want what's good for everyone. They're just a little quiet about it. That's my perspective.
Thank you, Hisonni. Last but not least, Ursula.
I appreciate what everybody's been saying and the perspectives that have all been brought to the table. I definitely agree with Tad that it's very hard to answer your question because I definitely don't see either of our communities as monolithic. And I think it really depends on a person-to-person basis, like where we are with one another. And I actually had 2 interviews back-to-back yesterday, people calling me to ask me about my thoughts on some of this anti-Asian violence. And the first one was a white guy, and he really wanted me to answer every question in a trend way. Like, he wanted a trend piece. He wanted me to explain why all Asians, why is this happening? And I felt so uncomfortable speaking to him because I feel like that's how our community is constantly being viewed. We're being asked to, people are so unwilling to see us as individuals and then the nuances of the very many different types of folks that make up our community, that they really just want to look at us as like a dark-haired, small-eyed group of people that all trend in one direction. So I really don't think I can answer that question like very cleanly. Right, the second interview was with a South Asian American woman, and she asked me for my perspective on things. It was very like, it felt very different, and I felt very, felt a certain way getting off the phone and realizing what a difference it made to be talking to someone from our community. And you know, one other thing I wanted to bring up though is, you know, there is all of this like systemic historical oppression that feeds into why we are or not getting along. But there's also very modern things that are contributing. You know, social media bubbles are a real thing. We're being funneled into these spaces where we don't actually have as much, communication with one another. And so I think that's like a real problem. We also have like foreign governments trying to fan the flames. And so I think where we're trying very hard to have solidarity, we're trying very hard to meet one another, to communicate, to find our commonalities, we're being forced in so many ways. It's so much harder now. And the natural state of being is that we're in separate pockets. I mean, a lot of people are surprised by all this anti-Asian violence that's happening in this moment. And I'm not surprised because my social circles contain a lot of Asian people. And I've been seeing all of this physical violence for years in my social circles. And the rest of the world is surprised. So I think that's something for us to think about and just think about going forward as we're trying to regulate all of these companies that are using our data and pushing our thoughts in very specific directions.
Thank you for that. Now, I've been really kind of pondering this question for, I would say, the last week, which is, there's been a lot of comparisons, and I think, Karen, you touched a little bit on this, between what is currently happening around Asian American hate crimes and the Black Lives Matter movement. Are those comparisons fair? Should we be doing that? Or is there something else we should be doing? And I'll go back to Karen, since you had originally touched on that.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's always the tendency, but also the urging by outsiders to compare. You know, I remember when, you know, I curated an exhibition called America's Concentration Camps, remembering the Japanese American experience, you know, during World War II. And, you know, America's concentration camps that's what FDR called them. I mean, the government itself called them. But, you know, I think that, you know, in some cases, the comparison with the Holocaust came up, and, you know, we're not comparing, we're only just telling our story. So I think that this concept of, especially, you know, playing, you know, the oppression game, you know, is very easy. It's the whole divide and conquer, you know, fight over the crumbs. And that's exactly, you know, what the white supremacists want us to do. It's distracting. It distracts from the real problem and the real enemy. So, you know, I think that it's something that we really have to be conscious of and be aware of, not to fall into that trap.
I'd love to jump in there, if I may.
Absolutely.
Karen, that was beautifully said. And I think you're absolutely right. We do have to be aware of those things. I get worried. And I think the thing that worries me the most is, and it's weird, I don't want to censor myself on this. This is really important. I'm trying not to. But like, we, how do I say this? We can't, the most important thing to see, for me, I guess what I'm saying is, if I see Yellow Lives Matter, I don't really see that as disrespectful. And maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. I guess it's still pretty new. But what I see is a people in need of the same thing as us. And it's not that crazy for me to assume in America, you know what I mean? Like, they need that. They need to state and reaffirm that we are people, we feel things, and we, you know what I mean? We need the same protections and considerations as everybody else. For me, that's the beauty of Black Lives Matter, is that just about, you know, if we're allowed to say it, anybody's allowed to say it, you know, anyone who feels they don't matter. And I get what you're saying. This is where it gets a little weird. Does it dilute that? Maybe, but I think I don't see it as a place of coming from disrespect so much as urgency. I think it's urgent, and no one knows what to say. What else do you say to get the attention you deserve? So I guess as a Black man, I know a lot of Black people won't embody the same perspective as me. But to me, yeah, you matter, and you should be able to say that in any way you want. And in a weird way, I believe Black people, first of all, should be supporting it. Because if you matter, then we matter. What do you think about that, Karen?
You know, I think you're absolutely right. You know, in a perfect world, I think, you know, if we all, you know, thought like you do, if we all felt like you do, we'd be in a much better place. But, you know, I think, you know, in a way, when people say yellow lives matter, you know, in another way, it just shows how much that Black lives and the BLM, and we called it the Black Liberation Movement, you know, in the 60s, how much they have led the way. Because, you know, the oppression that Black people have felt in this country has been around forever. And I think that there has always been a close solidarity. And especially, you know, I came of age in the long 60s, you know, and it was really identifying as third world. And, you know, that was actually, you know, we identified as third world first, I think, and then as Asian Americans, secondly, as non-white people, but understanding that it takes all of us to fight the colonialism, the imperialism, the racism that we're surrounded by.
You know, you were bringing up the going after the crumbs. In my head, I always call that the struggle Olympics. People trying to win the struggle Olympics just to, you know, get ahead. And Lord knows I'm caught up in that. Like every lab I apply for, diversity showcase or workshop, it's all about selling your pain as a way to get ahead. And you really do feel like you know, everybody's lumped into that. Like every underrepresented group, even LGBT, and you're just throwing how bad America made your life to try, you know, at someone to try and get ahead, to hopefully get a morsel. And when things get as heavy as they do in this past week, it reaches a fever pitch. I wish I desperately knew what the best course of action would be to take. Because for me, when I see Yellow Lives Matter, I just see desperation. And like, who am I to like stop that if it conveys the message? I guess I get a little scared of like, you know what I mean? Or even if having the conversation about Black Lives Matter versus Yellow Lives Matter, it's to me, it's scary because it feels like they want us to fight about that. I almost feel like as a Black man, the best thing I can do is lay back and support. It's almost like two parents. If a kid like says something and pits like the mom versus the dad, like even if the dad disagrees, he kind of has to sit there and let the mom do what she, you know, say what she needs to say to the kid. And you know, almost like, what do they call that? A unified front of some sort. I think we have to be a unified front and kind of deal with things later because it's so damn urgent. But I get where you're coming from too. What do you guys think? Ursula?
I don't know. The lingo is very interesting. I mean, I I personally wouldn't be going around saying Yellow Lives Matter, but I think I do think Karen brings up a really important point, is that so many of us in the Asian American community have, Karen has been around with her fist up for a very long time, but there are a lot of folks in our community that haven't been activated. We have a very specific history in this country with different waves of immigration, and some folks are just learning the language of protest and just starting to realize that they actually need to fight for something in this country, that is not going to be given to them. And so I think there's a very long road to building relationships with those kinds of folks and building the language. So, when I was filming down at Dark Stairwell, me and my editor often laughed a little bit, not to be unkind, but in the edit, because there'd be these huge protests of people that, were not comfortable with the language, and not literally not comfortable with the language. They were sometimes second, their English was a second language. And the concept of Black Lives Matter is a very, it's a very simple phrase, but it also is high concept. So in these protests, a lot of them, there was literally only one cheer. They would be saying justice, justice, justice. Meanwhile, we had, protests on the Akai Gurley side with a lot of African-American activists who had multiple generations of songs and chants and things like that. So a real different kind of language of protest. So it's sort of interesting to talk about the language, but I think it's important for people to remember that a lot of Asian Americans are really just learning. And so they're going to make a lot of mistakes. So I hope that some of this dialogue will help folks that are just coming to the movements understand why it might be problematic. Even if Hisonni says that you can use that phrase, there's going to be a lot of other Black folks that are not going to like it when you hold up a Martin Luther King sign and try to talk about it in relationship to Peter Liang, or something that comes in conflict with their movement. So I think we need a lot of patience with each other. It's going to take a lot of meeting people where they are, especially those that are new to the country and have English language proficiency that's different from the average American.
It requires finesse, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And for the folks at home, Peter Liang is the Chinese American cop who shot Akai Gurley. And that's part of Ursula's documentary, which I highly encourage you all see. So sorry for that plug, Ursula. Tad, Daisy, thoughts?
So for me, I think language is really important. Like Ursula, I would not personally use Yellow Lives Matter. I think it's almost dangerous to kind of compare those two movements, because in a way, we do have to acknowledge there is some privileges that come with being Asian, especially if you're lighter skinned. Yeah, could you repeat the question one more time?
No. Go ahead, Hasani.
Oh no, we were just I think we were just for Karen. I get exactly where Karen's coming from, and I think it's about the dangerousness of co-opting that. I think it feels like it could dilute it. Also, it causes a little dissent between, Blacks and Asians, and I see that danger. And I think I was rebuttaling by saying I don't know what else you guys would say at this point. It's urgent. You know what I mean? It almost feels like we don't have the time to figure out a slogan. You know what I mean? I don't think that I don't see as much harm in it unless people are setting out to take it super personal. Because I don't know. I think there's a lot of Black people who understand, including Martin Luther King, even that because he was fighting for Asians as well as Black people, that you guys have been done wrong and it needs to stop. Our perspective of everybody needs to change a little bit. Anywho, and we just wanted to see what you thought, see if you could bring something else to the table, because it's strange.
And a lot of this conversation is actually playing out over social media. There was a recent post by a Harvard professor comparing, Black lives with what is currently happening. And there's been TikToks TikTok of all places, right? How does that enter into a conversation? But I guess these days, folks are talking about you shouldn't be comparing the two because there is a particular brand of historical anti-Blackness and racism that particularly African-American and Black communities have had to struggle against. And to use that same language is to co-opt or appropriate that. And I think that's a really interesting conversation for us as Asian Americans. How do we, what is our own language around this? Is there our own language, or are we always borrowing from the African American community on so many things?
That's interesting. Tad, you got to jump in on this, brother.
Well, I mean, I think going back to what we were talking about before, I think corporate media is going to compare two issues and two communities, and always they're going to compare it the wrong way. But I think in terms of, I think there has been a lot of great momentum from the movement for Black Lives. A lot of, Asians for Black Lives, a lot of Asian Americans are really starting to, talk face to face with our own anti-Blackness in our communities. And then all of a sudden, a lot of COVID anti-Asian attacks happen. A lot of, I think then all of a sudden it might seem like things changes, but it doesn't. I think if anything, it amplifies, and it should stack on top and align with what the Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives has been doing and currently has been doing, instead of putting it in conflict and getting us off track. So like people said, the killings in Atlanta, if anything, on an emotional level, should help Asian Americans understand even more why we should be in support of Black liberation and the movement for Black lives. Also too, in theory, right? There's theory, and I think a lot of, maybe the last year or so, we've been doing a lot of theoretical stuff, a lot of writing, a lot of thinking, a lot of talking, but now it's the emotional part, right? And now also too, it's the actions. So when I see, Asian American communities, I understand the reactionary tendencies, and I can understand the emotion behind these reactions. But when we're talking about more surveillance, when we're talking about more cameras, when we're talking about more policing, that's exactly what we should not be doing, right? And that's exactly what we've been learning. If we truly have been learning and listening for the last year and a half, 3 years from the movement for Black Lives, we should understand why that's not the right approach. And so I think, now is a really good time. Again, it's about building a foundation. The work needs to continue to be done, when things aren't in the headlines. And so I think, anyways, I think that there's so much that we need to implement that we've learned. And to me personally, we've always, to answer your question, I think the Asian American movement exists because of the Black liberation movement, right? So we're always going to look at the Black community for leadership. But also too, I think all of us really need to realize on a core level that our own liberation as Asian Americans is intrinsically tied and will never happen if the Black community isn't liberated also or first. So I think on one hand, it's a rhetoric that I always, I think historically all of the rhetoric that I use probably comes from the Black Power movement. But also currently, I think we really need to understand what exactly we're fighting for in the big picture.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. I agree. And I think that's kind of like in the back of my head where I agree with you. Because to me, like, people say the problem everyone has with the phrase all lives matter is that it's dismissive. It's like a quick way of lumping everybody in at once and going, yeah, you matter. But for me, and this is going to sound crazy, but I'm going to say it for people who maybe haven't thought about it. How crazy would it be if there was Black Lives Matter as a total separate movement, and then, Yellow Lives Matter or Asian Lives Matter, and then Latino Lives Matter. If we go through it one by one and make change for each individual group, in a weird way, that's the real way of showing that all lives matter. You know what I mean? To me, it's the stacking I think Tad was talking about. I hope it goes down that way, but I could be, once again, I'm coming off the top of my dome, so I don't know if I don't know if I'm maybe missing something.
I mean, I think we could talk about language for a very long time. It's a very interesting topic, but Tad brings up a good point. A lot of what's happening right now in the Asian community is trying to find solutions that are going to put our communities further in conflict. A lot of people are pushing very hard for even the label hate crime to be applied to a lot of these crimes, which are all egregious, but the label hate crime is a very specific thing in the justice system, and it means something very specific when you're talking about punishment and incarceration. And so I think we have to think very critically about, beyond the language. I mean, beyond the language such as something like hate crime, which actually leads to something very specific and very specific responses from the government, the penal system, police. It's beyond language. It's what's happening to people when language pushes us in a certain direction.
So I do want to read a comment from Renee Tajima, and she writes that Karen and Tad, the perception of Black criminality is deployed in tandem with the model minority. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? How is that used?
That was the purpose of model minority, is to put Asians up as the good minority so that there isn't any racism in this country. Because look at the Asians, they survive, they're successful. So the implication is to Black and brown people, why can't you be like them? So it's definitely connected to Black criminality. That's the reason, that was the reason I think why my model minority, and we still haven't gotten rid of that. But, I think that, that the use of model minority, and that's another way, where Asians can feel the safe haven. Well, okay, well then we're the good minority, but that doesn't, we're still minoritized, we're still oppressed by white supremacy. So, by lumping, model minority, basically is a way to extinguish that there is a deep, deep race problem in this country. And that it was really used, as a vehicle against Black people, and pitting Asians against Black people. I still have to harken back to when we were, now the term is BIPOC, but in our day it was really third world, and it is this solidarity with all of us in order to get anywhere. We're not going to be able to do it singly, as different ethnicities, as different races, because in this country, we are all people of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color against a white supremacist sort of pyramid and hierarchy. So, I think, a lot of this is coming out now. We are just over the Trump era, and he has done tremendous damage. He has opened up the license to hate. And this country is becoming majority, minority, whether people like it or not. And there are a lot of people who don't like it. And it's this white anxiety that we're feeling. And that's the desperation I see there. It's desperate, it comes then in the form of voter suppression. one of the basic tenets of democracy. So you can see, I think when you see the larger picture, it is something that we all just have to try to keep in mind. And, it's difficult to do that, I think, on a day-by-day basis. But, it really is a solidarity that we need to go for.
Thank you. Tad.
Well, I mean, I think too, I think people also need to talk about what it means to be in solidarity, right? And I think for me, it's not necessarily doing something because you want someone to do the same thing for you necessarily, right? You're doing it because you understand that you're not doing it for someone else. You're really doing it for yourself by supporting another community's fight for liberation. And so I think that's too where we need to again approach it correctly, and instead of jumping to things right away. For example, there are the movement for Black Lives. There's a national strategy. There's organizations that have been creating campaigns and strategies for a long time. So we need to understand that and understand how we can utilize all our own privileges and resources to help support their campaign, not necessarily just jump out there and take up more space. I also think too that, I've never been more appreciative of my own Asian American studies classes or ethnic studies classes as I am now. Gave me both the historical perspective of where I'm coming from, helped me form my own identity, as well as help, provide a little bit of education on those same trajectories of other communities. But having said that, what I think we don't want to do is bring our own baggage to other communities. I think we need to figure our own shit out for ourselves, amongst ourselves, before we kind of bring that to other communities and expect them to help us process through our own shit. You know what I mean? Like, that's not perpetuating, that's not solidarity work, that's slowing it down, that's taking up space. So I think, there's just so much work to be done. But I think while it might be well-intentioned, I think it's important to funnel those passions, those emotions, those good intentions in productive ways by people who have been doing the work for years and years and years. And there is leadership. And so I think we need to also recognize that there's a certain lane we can play. That us as either Asian Americans or me specifically as a Japanese American cis, gender straight male, there's a lane that I can have to be in solidarity. But I need to first of all, I need to understand what that lane is and why that exists. And then also secondly, I need to stay in that lane. And something too, in terms of being an ally, I think you can't call yourself an ally, right? You have to do the work, and maybe that's what you hope other people to see you as an ally, but you can't give yourself the title as an ally. The community that you're there to help and support and to uplift, they're the ones that can give you that name of an ally.
Thank you so much for that, Tad. And you got a amen from Renee. So I think that means you're on point. I really resonate with that, especially making sure that the work of liberation isn't transactional. We should not be expecting something out of doing what's right. And I think that's kind of the problem of when we start comparing. But I think the impetus and the feeling behind that is, I stood up for you. Why don't you care about us or me, right? In the same way. But I think that message comes off poorly and wrong. So, again, I think your thought around, there's the emotional response and then there's the strategy response is right on. Other folks, what's rattling around in your heads?
I think Tad is dead on. I think you're 100% dead on. I do get scared. I get scared because people dying doesn't require immediate action, then what does? Like we can't, not every scenario, like, because to say that the Black movement wasn't at times impulsive would be absolutely incorrect. Like, I mean, Malcolm X, to a certain extent, was like the epitome of an impulsive response to injustice. And like, I think the Asian community deserves every underrepresented community's understanding, because there's just so much urgency. Like, I feel the urgency. Like, when people are dying, like, I want to snap into creating things to make a statement about it and whatnot, you know. And I guess, you know, it goes into that old saying, it's better to ask forgiveness than to get permission. And I don't know when is the appropriate time to do that, but I think about all of the people that we lost in Georgia, and I would argue now is the time, and maybe you got to figure it out later. And also, like, one thing I do think that is missing from the equation is forgiveness, and I would even say not forgiveness, understanding, because understanding comes before forgiveness. Like, we know Black people. And this is where I hold myself accountable. Maybe this is why I seem to have such a forgiving attitude on the situation, but we know what you've been through too. Like, we know how hard it was for you, and we know what you're going through right now. No one in their right mind could be asked to take action on this situation and make all the right decisions. So maybe we can take that into consideration. You know, maybe it would be good for once for an underrepresented community to fight for themselves and not have to worry about their allies or even other people who wear similar shoes as them judging them while they do it. That's infuriating to me. You shouldn't have to worry about it. Right now, you should be able to save your people and enact change in any way you want without having to worry about me yet. We could talk afterward, but let's get some change first. And maybe I'm wrong, though. Once again, I understand there's a cost for that sort of action, but I'm feeling a lot more like Malcolm X than Martin right now.
But Hisonni, I think you bring up a really interesting point at where Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders enter the national racial dialogue, which is always historically really been limited to Black and white. To our panel, where do you think Asian Americans are? Do we prescribe more to whiteness or something else?
Just real quick, just point of clarification. Like, I think all the comments that I made, and also probably will continue to make, are in relation to how Asian American filmmakers can support the movement for Black lives. So I think that was all in that context.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know. I'm speaking more broadly just because passion and frustration, I think. But I got you, Tad. I'm gonna go with that question again.
Ursula unmuted.
That was accidental. What was the question again?
No, I'm just curious your thoughts of where in the racial landscape do Asian Americans
that's a
fall?
very loaded question. I mean, everybody wants to say that Asian Americans are aspiring to whiteness. I mean, the fact is that we had very small numbers for a very long time, and that's why, you know, we're being politically ignored. We are the fastest growing, I think, racial group in the country now, and our numbers are significant. We made some very significant statements in the last election. So I think people are starting to pay attention. You know, I think, you know, where do we don't fall on either end of those. I don't think we can categorize ourselves according to those two categories. Obviously, there are privileges that we have and disadvantages that we have. We have, you know, like Black Americans, we have, you know, physical visibility that we can't we can't change. And like Latinos, we have names that that signify our backgrounds, and so we deal with those things. You know, I don't know. I mean, where do we fall in that? I have no idea. But I do think we're in a moment now. You know, Tad's talking about how, you know, filmmakers and activists can really like support the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that's incredibly important. But we're also seeing sort of an opportunity perhaps to engage folks that don't even think about that stuff normally. I think this summer, the George Floyd protests really awakened a lot of Asian Americans that haven't been caring about much other than their own, you know, lunch and dinner and snacks. And I think that and this moment right now is awakening a whole different group of Asian Americans. And I think it's very important what Tad said, that there's people who've been doing this work for generations, and we need to support those orgs, people that have done the organizing and know how to do the work and know how to do the solidarity building. There are lots of new players coming up right now that are able to lasso energy and money. And I think it's important that we try to figure a way to loop those masses into the movements that really understand and have done the work. And people are really, you know, I think Asian Americans are often surprised. I mean, something that I filmed within making my film, but they're often surprised at how much work goes into these movements. People are marching in the street. They are not just walking outside their doors, and they're not just getting some cardboard out of their recycling room to make a sign. These are movements that have been like very, very well thought out over the years, over generations. And you know, Malcolm X and MLK were very, you know, were very deliberate activists. They worked in very different ways, but they were very deliberate in what they did. And the people that are flooding in the streets, you know, flooding in the streets this summer were also very deliberate what they did. And I think it's important for Asian Americans now who are flooding into the streets to realize that that's not sustainable activism. Pay attention to the organizers who've been doing this for a long, long time, and pay attention to the work and the testing and the strategies that they have, and try to direct resources to those folks.
That is a great message. Thank you, Ursula. Daisy, you've been kind of quiet.
Yes, had a lot of thoughts, and kind of the first thing that I think about is like, if I wanted to do something, I would be brave enough to show my family what I've created. And I don't think I am. Like, I think I'm terribly scared of what they're gonna think of me, because I am not sure that they know what to do with that information. Like, I think I'm like remembering like a dinner table conversation that I had, and you know, I got into a heated argument, and like one of my family members was like, well, what do you expect us to do? And you know, I couldn't really answer her. So sorry.
No, I think you're tapping into something that's pretty common for a lot of Asian American families. And I was hoping that we could, as a panel, speak to, do you feel like there are generational differences that are playing a part, or is it about, you know, an immigrant population versus those who are born here? Does that play a part?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Yeah, like I'm not even sure if like I if I told my family about, well, like being a part of this panel, if they would even come, if they would even understand what I'm saying, because there is that language barrier as well. Yeah, I wouldn't even know how to like explain like what I'm doing, because I don't have that language to explain to them what I'm doing and what it means to me and what it means for our community.
Thank you for sharing, Daisy.
I just want to send Daisy a little bit of love. It's very hard to be the person that's trying to, you know, bring people in. It's, you know, especially when you're talking about, you know, I think there are a lot of folks watching right now that have family members that are much more conservative, much further away from being ready to deal with these issues. And it's a lot of work. And I think people find it easier to like go to Atlanta and sign up people to be voters that are strangers than to actually even speak to their own family members at home. But I think it's really important, Jason, like especially with these new immigrant populations and folks that are unindoctrinated in, who did not grow up in American school system, did not learn about the civil rights movement, do not have sort of the tutelage of like all these great Black liberation movements. There's a lot of work to be done there, and it's a lot of really hard work, and it's way harder than speaking to strangers, but I think it's some of the most important work. There are a lot of very specific cultural nuances in how we talk to one another, and I think that it's going to be hard for other folks to come in and do that, to talk to our family members. So we have to find ways to communicate with them and to really figure out a way to bridge some of those gaps.
Yeah, I also wanted just to send some love to Daisy too. I think Daisy, you reminded me too how how diverse our community is, and how everyone just has their own unique situation, right? And a lot of people, and because our community is so diverse, a lot of people have similar unique situations. But I think on one hand that makes it hard, but on the other hand, it really is a reminder to me that because of everyone's unique situation, everyone has a uniquely specific thing that they could bring to the table that no one else can. And I think that really, I think that's a power, right? And so I think, and Jason, when you asked the question, I think I wasn't only just thinking of like, I'm a fourth generation Japanese American versus, a recent immigrant community. I was also just thinking like Gen Z, millennial, OGs, and I so to think about like, yeah, if I was in my fifth year as in college now, I would be reacting very differently. And so, I think on one hand, I mean, yeah, I think Daisy, to you, like, not to add pressure, but really your generation is going to be the leadership and is the leadership right now. And not to put any pressure, but really we are looking toward your generation for that leadership. And we trust your generation with that leadership. And also, but just so you have generations just in this panel to support you, to help you through this, that you, in your family, this might be a unique situation for you, but in the history of Asian Americans, like, you're following in a long line of strong ass women activists that have changed, and we've been and are currently benefiting from that hard work and struggle and wins. So just wanted to send you some love.
I'm gonna jump in there too, Daisy. I think what you're doing is amazing, and I can't imagine how difficult it is. But when I think about it clearly, and Karen's gonna probably be able to back me up on this, what your parents are going through in regards to everything Ursula said, just the knowledge of all of those major civil rights moments in history, and how to reference them and how to make sense of them, that's not isolated to just you. That's by design. Like, that's hard for us to learn too. Like, most of my education on that comes from exceptional teachers who really didn't have books to reference. It's almost like the unspoken oral history of this country. And it took a lot of work. Like, I had generations of people breaking this down to me and telling me about people who were left out of books. And if they weren't left out of books, our schools couldn't afford the books that actually had a minimum. So again, that word understanding, like, I think that's what really disarms people enough to have meaningful conversation, is like understanding that what they don't know isn't always their fault. What you don't know isn't your fault. What I don't know isn't my fault. And the most shameful part about being an American is how much of my ignorance is by design. And we have to work really hard to undo that. So again, like it's gonna take a minute, but you can get it done.
Yeah, I think that, we have to remember, and I think, for some of us, we're denigrating, we're bashing the American dream because it's a myth. It's a way to get people to assimilate into mainstream culture. But we forget that that's why immigrants came here to begin with, and are coming here. There is an American dream, and so it's a contradictory. And I think, Daisy, you bring that up, that it's something that we have to, it's something that's we have to really struggle with, and to see each other's points of view. I think it's just like during World War II. So many of us, a third generation, when we learned about the concentration camps, so many of us turned to our parents and said, why did you let that happen? I wouldn't have let that happen. But we were not there. We were not in their shoes. We were not being having a history of being run out of town, being lynched. Chinese in LA, I think, was the largest lynching in the country. So we do have to try to see each other's points of view, and understand and realize that it's very contradictory at times. But I would say that you do stand on the shoulders of so many people, as did we. And we need to keep that lineage alive. I think so many of us didn't understand and didn't know about and realize our history, that we didn't know about the first generation Japanese Americans, the Issei, that came over in the late 1800s and 1900s. Were very much labor leaders. We don't get taught that history of activism. And I think that we all need to keep that thread going from the past into the present. And I think that your generation is it, but I think I see other generations below you too. My granddaughter was on a panel of young activists, and she's 13, but she was on a panel of young multicolored activists, artists, and to see them, there, and I felt, just the future is there. And I felt a lot better than when I look at, other so-called leaders, in this country right now. So, I do have a lot of hope.
I mean, I think this speaks all very directly to what the panel topic is how can we as filmmakers and artists and writers participate in these movements? Part of it is that our obligation is to capture the history so that people do know that they're standing on the shoulders of these great leaders and organizers, and also to fight against the other media that's out there, the social media and the pop media and the reality TV shows that Hisonni keeps saying, or someone said, what are we willfully ignoring? What kind of ignorance are we allowing ourselves to have? The more we can, the more these film festivals and filmmakers can elevate the work that underscores the histories that can help us with these movements, is the more we're going to be able to push forward with these movements and not have people feel like they're doing it for the first time and that they're alone and that they're struggling on their own. There's a lot of work that has come before folks, and that definitely provides a lot of emotional inspiration. So we can all be doing that.
Yeah, and to us, and I think especially that's where it's a privilege for me to be a filmmaker. Is because we can not only, especially as a documentary filmmaker, we can not only document and preserve and retell our histories, or document what's happening presently through a certain perspective and lens, but I think we can also imagine futures, right? Imagine a better future, imagine what all these things would actually, look and feel like. And I think that's really, really exciting to me.
Yeah, filmmakers are storytellers, and it's the stories that we need to pass on, rather than just the facts and figures. It's the stories that will touch hearts as well as minds.
Yeah.
As
I'll add to
well
that.
too, as just to create a culture, right? To create a progressive culture of liberation that can be fun, can be enjoyable. I think that's the biggest thing, with these online film festivals. It's great because we could still get the content, but like, there'd be probably a pretty cool after hours kind of spot after this panel if we were in, well, maybe not in Eugene, Oregon. I don't know. Maybe there's like one spot, but I think that's also like movements. The only way we're going to sustain this for the long run, if it's also fulfilling on multiple levels, including fun, including, excitement, including love. So yeah, I think that's also, as artists, our responsibility is not only to create content, but also to create a culture and help perpetuate, or even create a culture in resistance to mainstream culture, which is definitely, not doing its job right now.
I agree with you, Tad. Once again, I always say it's my duty to make films that speak to the Black experience, but it's my honor to make films about any underrepresented community. And it all, like, I go into my films and ask myself, one of my favorite shows ever is the show Mythbusters. And for me, I'm not a myth buster, but I am a stereotype buster. I look at the stereotypes about whoever my protagonist is, and I actively make a film where the character does the opposite of that. And I do that because I think we underestimate how powerful stereotypes were. I mean, you could arguably say that any seeds of division between the Asian and Black community were set by being fed stereotypes about one another that were unflattering. And even down to the model minority myth, that's a stereotype. And in my film Takeout Girl, wink, wink, the first scene we do is, the first thing we do is we just start busting stereotypes. I take it as my personal responsibility to go left where mainstream media goes right, and I hope people enjoy it while I do it. I hope people catch on to the fact that I'm doing it. I hope I make it trendy to do. I hope all of us do.
Well said, and everybody should go see Takeout Girl. So are there any questions from our audience? Please go ahead and type it into Eventive, and we can read it out loud here. But while we're kind of waiting, a little more interesting question is, what do you make of sort of appropriation of Black culture by Asian American artists? Awkwafina with sort of the image in Crazy Rich Asians as like the quote unquote sassy Black sidekick. Eddie Huang, and the use of African-American vernacular English. Even, folks have thrown the cultural appropriation tag on Bruno Mars. Where do we fall on that? What do we do? What is the right representation?
Who wants to go first on this, guys? Who's taking the plunge?
This isn't loaded at all.
I'll go first. Fine. All right. Look, I don't know how to label my perspective on it. This is gonna sound weird, but like, even if I take Asians out of the equation whatsoever, This is gonna sound weird, but like Black culture is American culture. Like the goal, arguably, of any civil rights movement is to be treated the same. We don't want to be treated better. We don't want to be excluded. And granted, a group of people may have originated it, but I would dare to say that most Black people would want, if we were just considered American or the same, you know what I mean, the same as other Americans, like this would just be American culture, and it would be free. It would be no problem for other Americans to perpetuate that, or to put that on a bigger platform. I always try to look at what I'm striving toward, and like what I'm striving toward is equality. I've spent my whole life running the 100-meter dash from 100 meters behind a lot of other people, and if I ever had, you know, if there's one person on the planet that can treat me equally, I guess it's me. I do so in my mind, and it would be my honor for another underrepresented community to put my art on the platform. And let's be honest, I'm gonna do the same. Like I'm gonna do the same, and I'm going to call it, you know, I'm going to proudly wear, do, and perpetuate whatever it is I see from another culture, and hopefully they see it as something to be proud of as well.
I think I always don't necessarily like that question, because I feel like that in question, people who are asking those questions, I don't think necessarily are recognizing or understanding too that a lot of the diversity within our communities, a lot of Asian Americans are, you know, grow up in different communities, different, you know, working class communities, different geographic communities. And so, I mean, to me, while I really do think, you know, there's definitely such a thing as cultural appropriation, I definitely think Asian Americans are guilty on multiple levels of that. But when it comes to how you speak, how you talk, how you dress, I think that's just a lot of the way people come up. And I think that's, to me, a beautiful thing. And so I just think when that question is asked, that's, to me, that erases the existence of a lot of us who grow up and have been in these communities side by side other communities, right? There's yeah, so I don't think, well, and then at the same time, there are people who will put it on, and that is cultural appropriation, but you can't tell someone who grew up just the way they did and talk the way they do that they're doing something wrong somehow. I think there's a lot of like gray area, I think.
You're right, Tad, but you cannot, absolutely cannot take the right from any minority to code switch. We need that. Like, because that takes away our identity as much as anything else. Like, to have to be one thing. Like, my film Takeout Girl is about an Asian American woman whose superpower is her ability to code switch. And make no mistake, that is a skill. Like, that's a skill that'll keep you alive in my neighborhood, you know, because I can only imagine what it would be like for me to be asked to either be hood or eat. Because to be hood at my job is not going to work. But to be hood when I think some guy's trying to rob me, it's very useful. So I think code switching is a very much needed tool by, I can't think of a minority group that doesn't need it.
I agree that code switching is an important skill and coping tactic, but also I think that it's really problematic when cultural appropriation is used as like a punchline. I mean, I think that there's a difference between having sort of an authentic bend in a certain direction and being a comedian that pops into BEV to tell a joke. And I think that is very commonly done by members of our community. And then there's also, you know, cultural, you know, we didn't even mention K-pop. I mean, you're talking about folks that are not growing up an authentic experience, but are commodifying and making money off a culture. So I think it's down to how the culture is being used or abused or made fun of.
Great point, Ursula. Karen, Daisy, any thoughts?
Well, you know, I think culture is more than just ethnicity. where you grow up, who your neighbors are, is all part of your culture. For example, the priest at our temple grew up in Watts, and he went to a school that was all Black. And unbeknownst to him, he grew up speaking Black English. But to him, it wasn't Black English. It was just English, because that's just, you know, what he knew. It wasn't until that he went to college in a white college that, you know, people were saying, you know, who are you? What are you? Then, and he had no idea what you're talking about. You know, the same with Japanese Americans who grow up on the East Side in LA. You know, it's not so much in some ways appropriation. So, you know, like your original question, Jason, about like Aquafina, I don't know exactly, I don't know that much about her. I don't know how she grew up, but I can see that, you know, there are a lot of people who don't look like, you know, how they sound. And I don't think it's necessarily appropriation, because it is their culture. It is who they are. It is how they grew up.
Great.
And I don't want to, you know, distract from the folks of the panel, but, you know, I do think we should also include other elements of cultural appropriation with our community, right? Like, I think the Asian American community co-opts a lot of Native Hawaiian words and might not know the history behind them, or necessarily have to inherit that history of colonization or settler colonialism. So I think there's, you know, we can go into, I don't want to distract, but I think, you know, there are definite ways that Asian Americans are perpetuating and participating in cultural appropriation.
Absolutely. Thanks for raising that point, Tad. Especially there's been a couple of comments around colonial settlerism and Pacific Islanders. I think kind of go hand in hand. Where do you think they fall in this conversation? Because I know you made Mele Murals, and that was a powerful doc. And how did you balance the Native Hawaiian representation and you as a Japanese American from the mainland?
I think going back to, you know, what we're talking about earlier, I mean, trying to just stay on point with how Asian American filmmakers could kind of support the movement for Black Lives. I do think it's really understanding your lane and understanding that you're, at least for me, I'll just speak from, I had to understand that I was there to help support in whatever way and bring the resources and privileges that I have from my community or from living in California or LA to help them, you know, the Native Hawaiian community that I was working with tell the story the way they wanted to. And so, you know, for example, to this day, I don't know if I was the right person to direct the film, but, you know, luckily I was the only non-Native Hawaiian on the team. And so that was probably the one more enjoyable projects that I've been able to work with, because it was really understanding my role, learning, first and foremost, sitting back and learning more than anything. I think that's what we should be doing right now as Asian Americans in support of the movement for Black Lives. And also to understanding what, you know, learning, then also to coming to the table with a knowledge of self, so then I could draw the parallels from my experiences to their experiences, you know, and then it doesn't necessarily become intellectual or theoretical, it becomes emotional. And then also understanding their campaign, and that we're understanding that film was as a part of a larger resurgence of Native Hawaiian culture, and which is part of a larger political movement for sovereignty and et cetera, et cetera. So understanding where I fit in the production team, where the production team fit in the film, where the film fit in the movement, and where that movement fits in a larger global perspective. And again, that all creates lanes that help me find out where I should stay and what my role would be. and what best I could do to help that community that I was being a part of.
Thank you so much, Tad. That is, I think, absolutely on point, and I can count on you for that one. But it's 4:30, and I'm wondering any closing thoughts from each of our panelists. Karen?
Well, to me, you know, I've said it over, is solidarity. And I think that we need it now more than ever. You know, I was talking to Renee Tajima Pena, you know, before this, and like so many people now, especially this week, of reaching out to each other to not only see if we're okay and how we feel, but also where do we go from now? What do we do? Words matter, but also it has to, you know, you can talk the talk, but you got to walk the walk. You got to do something. So, you know, I know that Renee, for example, is talking about, you know, looking at next month, May, which is traditionally Asian Pacific Heritage Month, to really look into it as a solidarity month. And I think that's something solid, you know, that we can actually do and work toward. I know other organizations as well and other coalitions across the nation are thinking of also ways that we can actually put our words into action. So, you know, that's where I see, and I see, you know, DisOrient. You guys are doing, you know, your part in this, you know, having this panel, having the online festival, having the films that you do have had, and you know, all of it counts. All of it is hopefully moving us forward in the way that we should be doing.
Thank you. Daisy?
Um, well, I really appreciate you inviting me here, and wanted to say thank you for everybody's words and for, you know, spreading the love, and just reflecting on like my role as a filmmaker. Really hopes that my docuseries will help amplify Asian American voices, and for people to see that we are very diverse and that we, oh my God, I don't even know what to say, like want to be in solidarity with the Black community.
Thank you, Daisy. Tad?
Yeah, thanks for allowing us to be part of this panel. Thanks to DisOrient for holding down for so long, and being a supporter of all our films. And yeah, I think, you know, this month, this week, these past years continue to be relentless and extremely hard. And I'm grateful to have, you know, people and resources to learn from. I continue, you know, to learn, and grateful to have a community to both struggle and mourn and learn with. And I think, yeah, just a reminder for everyone, like this is a long-term thing, right? And it's a commitment over the long term, but at the same time that there's comfort in that the communities we build now are going to be with us and future generations for the rest of our lives.
Wise words. Ursula?
Just thank you very much to DisOrient and to all the folks that took their time tonight to tune in. I think it's like a really tough moment. So much is going on in the present, that it's been kind of exciting to talk to you guys today and think that so much of the past and so much of the future are going to invigorate us. So I think I just want to remind folks that, whatever's hard in this moment, looking back and looking forward could really give us a lot of energy, and I'm excited. I think there's a lot of opportunity moving forward. So I'm thrilled to be sort of in the room with these folks who are creating incredible work and are part of both looking at the past and the future. And I hope that folks tuning in will find the same kind of inspiration.
Thank you, Ursula. Thank you for being here. And I wanted to give the last word to Hisonni.
Thank you very much, sir. Guys, it's been wonderful chatting with you. I think, Karen, your words resonate with me. Solidarity. Tad, your words resonate with me. Big time about like not knowing if you were the right filmmaker or not, because I feel like I'm in the same position. I am a Black man who has made a film about an Asian American woman. As far as we're making it, as far as we're going with the diversity in the entertainment industry, sometimes I get a little scared that we're moving from one type of exclusivity to another. And if there's anything I can say about making the film Takeout Girl and being in front of you right now, it's pretty much because there was nothing but solidarity and empathy amongst a crew of Black guy, Chinese American woman, Filipino woman, Cuban man, and that was pretty much my crew. Those were the brains that came together to make sure this story was authentic but above all else, relatable. And I think it took all of that time together to realize that all of our stories weren't that dissimilar, that we suffered from the same ailments in this country, and that we understood each other's struggle. So remember, I think the biggest step towards solidarity is empathy. And thank you, DisOrient, because like I said, I didn't even think I'd be here. This is crazy.
Well, thank you to all of our filmmakers today, Karen, Tad, Daisy, Ursula, Hasani. This was a wonderful conversation, and I hope that the things that you've said and given to our community today is able to be heard by many, because it's wise and sage advice, and I can't wait to see that future that you all create. So thank you. And hang around. We have a little after party for you all. No, not really. But thank you to our audience for tuning in. And please check out all the other films at the rest of our festival, especially the films that are represented by these filmmakers here. So thank you.